Hello and welcome to the May edition of the 2017 Quiltmania Mystery Quilt. Today I'm going to show you the next two blocks and showing you a little bit about how I've assembled the blocks. These blocks, the first one has got some piecing as well as applique, and the second one is purely applique once again. So some of these techniques we've already covered, so I'm not going to go over things that we've covered in previous videos, and you can refer back to those if you need to. So the fabrics we're using this time are, again, the background shirting, which is unique to all of them, and we've got these four fabrics which we've used previously, and we're introducing the border print. So there's quite a bit of the border print, and you will actually use this for your main borders later on. The border print is a great print in terms of being able to fussy cut, so I'm going to show you a little bit about fussy cutting as we go through and how you can get great effects with that, and different effects depending on how you cut from the border print. So the first block we're going to start with, I've actually started, so this is an applique block. I've cut the templates for this block using Violin again because I like the way the Violin adheres to the fabric and doesn't shift on you, and it's much easier to pin that on. So I've pinned this on the top of the fabric and just drawn around it, and I find that that is much easier to use than something like Templastic or even freezer paper. So I've stitched these first layers on. I'm not going to show you how to do that again because we've covered that. So we've got the shirting, a red shirting circle. Again, make sure that your seam allowance is about 3/16 of an inch. Then the yellow shirting, sort of flower type motif. Just remembering again your seam allowance, but also that you've got these little points that you're cutting into here. So just cutting into within a few strands of that and securing those down before you start the next curve. And then the little hearts. Now we've covered hearts in the previous two lessons. Just that with these particular hearts, I've actually fussy cut those so that we've got the same look amongst them. So to do that, what I've done is using the lattice print. I've actually got my template and I've positioned it how I wanted it. So I've found a part of the motif that I like, and I've lined that up, and Lissy might want to zoom in. So I've lined that up to a part of the print that I quite like the look of, and I've just drawn onto the Violin so that it's easy then when I pick it up to move it along and just to line up the marks on the Violin in order to trace around it for the next motif. So that's what I've done with those four, and I've then stitched them on. What I'm ready to do now is to applique these motifs on here. So at the start, again, I folded my fabric to find my reference points and positioned that circle in the middle. Then I've gone back to my light box and I've positioned the pattern on the light box, lined everything up, and then pinned these motifs on. So these motifs are cut from my main border print fabric. So it's this motif here at the top, and I've allowed about 3/8 of an inch around the edge of that, and that's now ready to baste on properly and to sew. So I will baste that on, and I'll sew around those motifs like we did with the previous applique, cutting in at the points as we need to, and just trimming in on any inner curves just to get that nice smooth curve. This is the start of the next block for this month, and I've just pinned these four motifs on. Now these are cut from the other motif that's down the bottom here, and again I've allowed just a little bit extra. When you cut these motifs out, just allow yourself a little bit more. You're better to trim a little bit off than to find that you've actually just used a little bit less than you might actually need, and then you've got nowhere to go with it. So again, fold your fabric into four, find your diagonals, Then I've popped this on the light box and I've pinned it on, and now I'm going to baste that down so that it's held in place while I applique it on. So I'm going to do that, and then we'll come back and show you the rest. So this, we're not going to use that particular motif that I've just shown you. I'm going to put that aside for a different block. So I've traced the one we're going to use, so I've lined this all up and traced it onto the template, and the motif we're going to use is this little one here. So it's a little flower that sort of extends through. So I've already traced that on, and that sits beautifully. So you can see how easy that is now, just to pick it up and to line it up with the motif before you do it. Now I've traced this onto the front of from the front of the fabric. What you need to remember to do is when you actually go to trace this out, is that you'll need to, because you're going to be marking on the back of your fabric, so you need to turn your template over. So you can still see through the fabric, you can line everything up, just making sure that you turn it over so that everything lines up and it's not a mirror image, because you've traced from the front. So once you've done that, we're going to get the board. So I like to have a sandpaper board behind my work. So I'm lining that up, making sure that everything is well positioned. And sometimes you just have to rotate it a little bit to get it completely right. Once I'm happy that that's where I had all those motifs and where I was planning to trace, I will then draw around my motif, my template. I'm just checking to make sure that I haven't shifted it, and that all looks pretty good. So I'm now going to trace around the template, and I'm going to add, once I've traced, because I'm going to hand piece this block, so I'm drawing around it, and then I'm a big quilter's quarter or quarter plus at a quarter person, so I like to have an accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance. I just find it much easier when you're hand piecing to be able to line those raw edges together, which if you've used a 1/4 inch or marked a 1/4 inch and seam and cut along that, your seam allowance should automatically go together. Now I've also given you, in the pattern sheet, I've given you the template for a circle, so that if you prefer to applique these little diamonds directly onto the circle, or if you prefer to use English paper piecing using the Sue Daly technique, then you can piece the star together and then you can applique it onto the circle. So you've got a few options there. I like to actually piece mine in. I find that for me, I get better points that way, and I just find that easier, but no way is the correct way, and it's really a personal preference as to which way you would prefer. So we're going to mark all of our 8 diamonds, cut them out, and then we'll sew them together to form the star. So once you've cut your diamonds, you're going to join them into pairs, and then into halves, and then into the complete 8-pointed star. And once I've done that, I then will add the outside little curves to make the circle. So looking at that from the back, once I've done that, I then press it, and I'm pressing all those seam lines in the one direction, and then I splay the centre bit out so that it sits nice and flat. Once you've made the centre circle and you've pressed it from the back, I'm then going to add the outside ring, which will then be fluted at the end so that you can applique it on. So I've just prepared another sample just to show you, and I'm not sure whether you can see very clearly, but using my template, and again I prefer to use the Violin template. I've actually popped that on the front and centered it so that I've just centered it on the print, and then I've marked with a gel pen, I've marked those curved lines so that once I've joined the center circle and put that into the middle of this, I can then trim that back along, just out with allowing the seam allowance to applique along those lines. So just to show you, I've marked it on the front, then I've pinned this on the back, and I've put this over the light box so that I've made sure that I've lined what I've put on the top with what I've put on the bottom. At this point, and this is the beauty with using the Vilene, if I was to cut this circle out to start with, I risk it being stretched and being distorted, and that's the last thing I want to do. So now that I've marked this and I've got it pinned in, I can then come in here and I can trim. This is my seam line here, and this is my cutting line. I'm actually going to trim this back on my sewing line. So I'm just holding that away, and then I'll mark that line through onto the fabric once I've trimmed that back. So you've got to be very careful, because once you're cutting out the fabric, you're then no longer going to be on the straight of grain, because this is a curve. So it's very easy to accidentally distort it, and if you distort it, then you're going to find that it won't sit flat. So that's why I like to mark this line on the outside, and then I'm trimming this around here. And you can imagine trying to do this with a piece of Templastic or Mylar or something like that. You're not going to get a really smooth curve, and you really can't pin Mylar or Templastic onto your fabric. So this just gives you a little bit more flexibility, and it pins on beautifully, and it does adhere to the fabric. So nearly all the way around. Just making sure that at the end where you've just gone in that you stay right on that line. So you can then take that out and remove it, and then getting my board again, I'm going to trace, just gently draw that line in. So this is my sewing line that I'm drawing in at the moment. So just transferring that sewing line through, and again using something that you can clearly see. I'm using just a 0.72B mechanical pencil, and a grey lead for this is fine because it's a colour that I can see clearly, the line clearly with. If you were using a darker fabric, then you may choose to use a sew line or another pen that has the flexibility of different coloured leads. Once you've drawn all the way around it, we can then remove the pins and remove the pattern. And we've just got the circle here on this side because we've got the other edge on the right side of our fabric. And then using the quilter's quarter or the adder quarter, I'm just going to mark that cutting line in. So just going all the way around with that so that I know where to cut. Once I've marked that line, I can then cut that circle out, being very careful again that you don't distort and don't stretch things. So just lying it loosely in your hand, you can then trim that out. Again, as I said earlier, if your preference is to applique this down, then that's another option. You would then just mark your outside stitching line to applique, and then you would centre your 8-pointed star on the centre of that and applique it down. So this again, both options, and neither one is better than the other. It just is dependent on your preference and what you feel most comfortable doing. But as I'm piecing mine in, I'll just show you how I do it. Once you've done that, you're then going to gently fold that in half. Actually, we might do it the other way. And I like to then finger press or pop a pin in so that you're marking your midpoints, and we're actually going to fold it so that we mark the 8 points of the star. So we've still got this as a square because it's going to be more stable as a square as opposed to if we'd already cut that fluted edge. So then once you've marked your first two, you'll just refold that so that you're matching those two pins, and you'll mark the next quarters. Now I'm just popping pins in here. You may not need to do that if you can finger press it and see it. It's easier, I think, for the camera to pick it up if it's got pins in it. Then we're going to fold it, unfold that, and we're going to fold it this time on the diagonal. Just going to smooth that pin out. And we're going to align the pins that we've already put in and make sure that those line up to get the next the eighth points, to mark the eighth of the circle. And then we can line those two up to give us the final two pin marks. And when you do that, you'll see that everything else should line up, and if it hasn't, like that one there doesn't, we now just check that. Okay, and then we will then refold that just to find your last points. Okay, so effectively what we've done is we've just found a point for each of the points on the star, and that then makes it really easy to piece together. Just move that out of the way, because what we're going to do is we're going to line up one point for each point on the circle with each point on the star. We've lost that one's underneath. So as you can see, I've already stitched that in, so it's just a matter of lining up the point. If you can imagine that we have this here, we're just going to go around, we're going to match each point to a point in the circle and then just ease in the middle to stitch it. So we've stitched that down and it's ready now to be appliqued on. So we've got our line here, we're now ready to applique, so I'm going to trim this outside bit back so that we've got that nice fluted edge. So again, coming about 3/8 of an inch, so 3/16 of an inch from the drawn line. And as I've said previously, you're better to err on the side of caution. It's better to cut off too much and trim it back later than to find that you haven't left yourself enough seam allowance, in which case you risk the work fraying. And it really gets starts to take shape when you cut away that excess bit of seam allowance. Well, not seam allowance, but excess, and trim it back to the seam allowance. So this is now trimmed back. It's got the little fluted edge. I haven't finished appliquing these on, but once I've finished these, I'll find the centre point. So I'll match the centre here with the centre that we've marked here, and I'll adjust that so that the star is sitting square on it. We've marked through our diagonals previously, and we've marked through our cross sections through the middle. So I'll pin that on and baste it on, and then I can applique that down. And once you've done that, the block is complete. Again, it needs to be pressed from the back, so you'll flip it over, give it a press from the back of it, and then you'll trim the completed block back to 15.5 inches, including seam allowances, as it's a 15-inch finished block. So these are the two blocks that we've done this month. We've got Spinning Around the Stars, which is now finished, and we've got Dancing Around the Hearts. Now that the blocks are completed, we're going to trim them back to 15.5 inches after we've pressed them from the back. And that concludes the video for the May Quiltmania Mystery Quilt. And enjoy and have fun. See you next month. Bye.